Hello, everyone. My name is Allison Ritz. Again, sorry for being a couple minutes behind, a little bit of a technical difficulty, but we are live now. Thank you all for being here. Again, this is our Reimagine How You Win webinar series. We're here every other Thursday discussing all things visible threat as well as topics like today, really talking about what's impacting the industry and how optimization and AI is a huge part of that. So just as a lead in here, over the next 30 minutes, we're going to really dive into the question. Oh, I'm seeing here that folks are not hearing. Okay. Can anybody give a heads up in the chat of whether you can hear me now or no? Can you all hear me? Okay, great. Excellent. So I'm not sure if you got the front end, but if you didn't, so today we are going to talk about the conversation around AI and proposals. The big thing that we hear all the time is AI going to replace our proposal team? The question feels urgent, obviously, but it kind of points us in the wrong direction. So the more useful question, and I think the real answer is that it's not going to replace the proposal team, but it is going to shift the way that we work. So once that first draft, and once some of the drafting and some of the manual analytics are no longer the constraint, it's where does our focus shift and how can we be the most useful? So it moves the team upstream away from, producing documents to validating, governing, and making the decisions that the human in the loop needs to make. So ultimately, over the next few years, the organizations that harness this power appropriately are not going to be the ones that are doing things more quickly and generating the most content. Will be the ones who can really operationalize, trust AI at scale, and leverage it where it's most effective. So today, like I said, we'll talk about why AI isn't replacing proposal teams fact and really look at what is the right question, how can we operationalize what we're doing? Then what does that structure look like? And then operationalizing prompts and operationalizing some of these structures within using AI. We'll talk a little bit, one slide, about how Visible Threat approaches that, but that is universal information as far as operationalizing a prompt library. And then why deterministic review is important and where that comes into our overall workflow with GenAI, deterministic technology, and of course, the human in the loop. And what do we need to prepare for today to make sure that we're successful tomorrow and years to come as we build our AI structures? And like I said, I'm having a little bit of fuzziness on my end, so I'm going to turn my camera off, but I'm still here, obviously. Let me know if there's anything you need in the chat. And of course, go ahead and put questions in the chat. I'll go ahead and address those at the end. So again, I'm just going to go off camera here to make sure that I'm conserving bandwidth, but we'll move forward. Okay. So let's start with kind of the pressure that every proposal shop is feeling right now. Timelines are getting shorter, the RFPs are getting larger and more complicated, the compliance piece of the puzzle is more intricate, and reviewers, even before kind of our first pink team, are exhausted from the pace and the cycle and the overall workload. So into that environment that you're operating in today, we are going to drop this. There should be, I'm sorry, I did pause real quick because I had a question about the attendee chat. So I did see the thing that said that I can't type into the attendee chat. I saw that pop up, so I am seeing your messages. So again, thanks for everybody who gave a thumbs up that you could hear me, and I can see the messages in the attendee chat. Okay, back to this. Okay, so the instinct is correct to think we have this really overcomplicated process that we're working through. We are having trouble kind of on the ends, and then AI is coming into the picture. So is AI coming in to replace people? The answer, in my opinion, is no, because it accelerates one part of the life cycle, content production, but it doesn't touch the parts that decide whether you win. So judgment, strategy, compliance. So the replacement question kind of misreads the change. So AI is changing where in the life cycle the team spends its time, and now it kind of shifts where the real difficulty lives. So here's kind of the core idea that we're covering in our session today. So every proposal process has a constraint, so a stage that is going to limit everything else. For a long time, that constraint was drafting. So it could be intake, and let's take that a step, walk that a step back. If we're talking about kind of our front end constraints when we're thinking about identifying requirements, so identifying requirements, creating a compliance matrix, signing sections, and then getting that initial content to work with. Generally, that bottleneck, which with all the folks involved, was where we were losing a lot of time or where we're sinking a lot of time in the front end. That is where we're seeing the most benefit from optimization. So from the intake side of automating compliance matrices or requirements identification, initial risk analysis of RFPs, and then beginning to assign and work through first draft content. So there were kind of never enough hours to get things started fast enough words on the page. It was just a really burdensome sort of front end. So GenAI kind of relaxes that constraint, but removing a constraint doesn't eliminate it. It just relocates it to another part of the process. So when drafting is faster and cheaper, in the sense, air quotes, of when we're putting generative AI into the mix, the pressure moves downstream to validation and decision making. That part of the process is where the human always is going to be involved and always needs to make logical, informed decisions. So can we trust the content? Is it compliant? Does it really differentiate us? So if your team structure, your tooling, and the metrics are optimized for speed, you're now optimizing the wrong stage. The speed and the optimization on the front end is here. Everybody is incorporating GenAI or optimization tools into their process. So you'll produce content faster, but a meaningful share of it could be confidently wrong, and then you would begin to scale dysfunction. Ultimately, what does that relocation or what does that restructuring of the team do on paper? What does that look like on paper? So on the left is the model that most of us are familiar with. Writers draft from scratch, SMEs handwrite large technical sections. Proposal managers kind of chase documents and deadlines and sort of wrangle all of the cats in the yard. And then reviewers do a final compliance pass at the end, usually under a ton of time pressure. What I hear when I've talked to customers over the years is this sort of last validation step when we're talking about compliance, of course, but really getting into the things that win, you know, our differentiators, our positioning, our win themes. Those things at the end often don't get the time that they deserve, just due to the level of work and the bandwidth that folks have. So on the right is an operational model thinking about the incorporation of AI and of tools into your process. So the roles don't disappear, they just change function. So writers are curating and sharpening. You have that front end part. So we've pumped out a first draft, and we'll talk a little bit about making sure that that's high quality and grounded in content in a few slides. But we've created a first draft, and now we're working from validation, accuracy, really generating and using the most of the time from our SMEs and our professionals. So ultimately, we can focus, we're getting that time back that we didn't have before, and focusing on making sure that the story that we're telling is accurate. We're positioning our products in the appropriate way. So, you know, our proposal managers are then going to orchestrate the workflow, the inputs, the review gates with optimization and tools that is more visible. And then reviewers move from kind of our final gate validation to a continuous validation layer. So same people, but higher leverage, kind of higher center of gravity. So we're just working from, we're moving from producing to governing the system that produces it. So looking at that in the shift, so make that kind of concrete here. So writers stop being first draft generators. So the machine's handling the blank page in this structure. Then the human becomes the narrative architect. So there we're deciding what differentiates this bid. And SMEs spend hours on structure. They're validating and confirming technical accuracy and catching the claims AI can't be trusted to make. In the reality of today's world, even if we're grounding our content in data, even if we're pulling from trusted repositories, AI takes liberties. That's just the way that it's designed. Excellent from a creativity perspective, but can get us into a little bit of trouble when we're talking about the actual impact and the actual accuracy of the content. So proposal managers here are making a big expansion. So we're operating this whole content engine. So we're owning the inputs. That's a huge piece of the process because everybody's heard garbage in, garbage out. Your outputs are only as good as your inputs. So making sure that our content is verifiable, that it's validated, that it's up to date, and everything is being managed appropriately. You're managing the prompts and the baseline of the workflows that you're using to create this content, managing review, and then the governance within. So the pattern across all three is the same. The lower the judgment a task requires, the more it moves to AI. So the more likely it is that we can automate it. The higher the judgment, the more it stays human, because generative AI, LLMs are not smart. They are context driven. It can't make the determinations that the human brain can make. So when we're looking at these processes, the way to really look at it, when you're thinking about what part of our process should we automate, I say, what is the risk of being wrong? If you have a very high risk, if this is incorrect, if I have one miss, or if I position this inappropriately, that could sink the bid, or that could have big impacts on us. Versus if I'm wrong, not a big problem, we can change it, we have time to be creative, we can expand on these things. So ultimately, what is the risk of being wrong? And that is how you can determine what's a good piece of the puzzle to automate and what should stay a human judgment. So the risk really with AI in the process is not adoption. So it's not, will people use it? Well, I'll take that back, because yes, of course, when you're bringing in a tool, it is. But when you have a tool incorporated in your process, it's not necessarily adoption. It's are people using it consistently? So people likely already are. Shadow AI is a big part of the process. You may have heard that term, that folks are using their own bits of solutions here and there. They're creating workflows and workarounds. So ultimately, the real risk is that everyone is using it differently. So 10 contributors prompting 10 different ways against 10 different sources are going to produce 10 different levels of quality, and none of it is really traceable. So that variance becomes a big part of the process, and variance is really the enemy of compliance. We need a repeatable process. So we need to treat prompting, we need to treat workflows as an operational function, the way that we're running other parts of our process today. So we want to standardize prompts, control data sources, define new review gates. So what does this look like in a new process with new technology? Where do we need to review, and where are additional areas where things could fall down? So governed outputs are the key. And let me show you what that looks like in practice. So how do you actually operationalize prompts? I'm showing you the visible thread approach, but obviously this can be used in other spaces when we're thinking about like governed and managed prompts. The visible thread just builds as part of the system, so it makes it easier to access and apply. So the core idea is a shared prompt library that sits at the center of the process, rather than living in individual chat windows or in contributors' individual spaces. So the kind of 4 pieces of the puzzle that make it work are, first, that it's standardized and approved. So you have vetted prompts for tasks instead of 10 personal variations. So if there are very specific items, specific structures that you need within these prompts, everybody using the same structures are going to lead to more similar outputs. Obviously, it's never one for one, but more similar outputs that are easier to govern and manage, and outputs that can be created or compiled together for your multi-contributor responses in a much more meaningful way. The second is grounding. So each prompt needs to be tied to our approved reference library, past performance, and compliant content. So it's not inventing from nothing or using just its information. The prompts need to be tied to the data that you're sourcing to make sure that you're using reliable data that is referenceable and verifiable. Third, we want to map to review stages. So every prompt has a defined place and an owner in the workflow. And then fourth, version and govern. This is the biggest piece of the process. So if we're making changes, we're tracking them. Outputs need to stay traceable and defensible. So this is the connection to kind of everything else I'm talking about today, is that prompts produce the draft. The deterministic piece of the puzzle prove it and make sure that it's verified. And then the library is kind of what links that process. So speed never outruns way, if that makes sense. So ultimately, we want to take one thing away from this session, is make sure that we are governing and controlling that process and managing a prompt library. If that is within Visible Thread, wonderful. If that is in another location or a different structure, then that makes sense as well. It's just you have to make sure that you're all working from the same playbook, essentially. Now, kind of the pivot. Why does the structure matter so much? Because failure is not really what, or failure, I guess failure in the sense of from an AI perspective, is not what the review process is built to catch. So old content looked bad. We had typos, we had gaps, we had filler, you had irrelevant pieces of the puzzle, and you could spot it across the room. So you're doing your review, you know what bad content looks like, you know what, poor supportive win themes looks like. Now, the tough thing in this new world is that bad content looks good. So it's fluent, it's confident, it's well organized, and then it can be wrong. So metrics can be fabricated and look just as good as the accurate ones. Requirement can be addressed in tone, but not really in substance. Subtle contradictions between two sections if you're using very separate prompts and structuring. So while a lot of the content that GenAI can produce is fluent, it's not always correct. So you really need to look at the danger in the not obviously broken paragraph, because in AI world, fluency and correctness don't travel together. So it's the thing that we really need to pay attention to. And the most plausible content is the thing that no one questions. You read something that looks credible, but the danger is in the details. So here's the structure that contains that risk. So looking at the human in the loop structure. So 5 stages, simplified to 5 stages. 1 is grounded inputs. So approved sources, past performance, compliant references. I know a lot of platforms, including Visible Thread, reference your structured libraries, or reference in the Visible Thread world. It goes a step further and you can create collections so you can get a real hold on the content that you are using and make sure that nothing slips in that you don't want to be reference material. But make sure that the model is not, inventing stats and inventing areas, and that needs to be traceable. So we need to be able to reference a claim that's being made to its source material. Second, our AI draft generation. So this is where the speed lives, and this is where the speed comes in our new process. So fast, genuinely useful for first drafts, restructuring, analysis. 3 is the deterministic validation layer. So this is a stage a lot of platforms skip, just from a capabilities perspective, and a lot of folks skip in general. So I want to spend the most time on this here. I have a couple slides past this where we'll dig into that layer specifically. But 4 is human review. So this is where the experts actually apply judgment to what survived validation. So we have our AI draft, we're doing deterministic validation to throw out the junk, identify any big inconsistencies, and then human review takes on the next step. And then 5, strategic refinement. So obviously this is something that we're doing in the current state, but this is the step where we get cut short a lot of the time due to deadlines. So if we're getting to this point more quickly, or getting to this point in a more meaningful way, we have the time to sharpen the win and really focus in on messaging and your strategic positioning. So our speed is in stage 2, our control is in stage 3, and the judgment in our human review is in stage 4 and 5. AI does an excellent job at drafting and creation, amazingly creative, great tool, great partner to have. It does not do a good job with judgment. It weighs everything very similarly. So each stage has a different job, and you can't collapse them into one. So it's important to have all the pieces of the puzzle to make sure that things are functioning effectively. Next, let's talk about kind of the sharpest distinction. I mentioned deterministic systems earlier. So generative AI is very probabilistic. It's not going to be consistent. Deterministic is the exact opposite. So same input, same output every time. Excellent when we're talking about consistency, detection, traceable evidence, and repeatable and auditable processes. So the thing we want to remember is we can't probabilistically validate compliance. So a shall is addressed or not. So there's no, oh, we're 80% compliant, that's close enough. We have to make sure that we are making our facts defensible and understanding that one misrequirement can remove us from the situation before anybody reads our win theme. So we really want to invest in validation, invest in that deterministic step, and keep humans in the loop, of course. So look at this scenario if we're talking about GenAI versus deterministic. So requirements coverage. And if you've seen a GenAI summary, this will seem very familiar to you. So we have, this section is compliant or appears compliant. Well, when we really did a deep deterministic review, we uncovered 3 deterministic or 3 shall statements. We had some inconsistent terminology. We had an omitted deliverable reference. So there's some items there that that we're not flagging. Validation, and this can come in a lot of different ways, this is acronym specifically, but inventing and expansion are missing terms. So a lot of times if we do a quality check with generative AI, we're going to miss a few pieces just by design, or things are going to get categorized incorrectly. So we just need to make sure that we have that layer in place. And then analysis. So we're doing an amendment analysis. We're updating timelines, make some clause changes. But then when you dig deeper, you identify that there are some very specific things. In the legal world, you've seen a lot of this where we're citing inappropriate case law or case law that doesn't exist. So really need to focus in on the deterministic layer being our guardrails to GenAI. So 4 things that you can do and start now before we have everything in place and before you're working within an AI tool. So the first thing you always want to talk about when I talk about data readiness, when I talk about AI adoption, this is always first. It really is process maturity. So AI is going to amplify whatever process you already have. So if you have a broken workflow, AI is going to break it even faster. So dysfunction scales just as quickly, if not more quickly, than a functional process. So really look at our process. Second, we want to make sure our content is governed, make sure we have reliable sources of truth. Third, review frameworks. What does this look like within our process? We have to decide explicitly what AI is allowed to generate, what humans must validate, and where we need to use deterministic systems. And fourth, operational readiness. So having a prompt library, having a source of truth, having reusable workflows, making sure we're grounding our content, and making sure that we have a review cycle in place that is not just our original review cycle, because when we incorporate AI into the mix, there are some new potential issues that we need to look out for. So make sure that we have a review cycle that matches our current process. And so finally, our takeaway here, the future proposal team is not smaller, it's just more operationally mature. So we're not focused on running and chasing and manual requirements extraction and manual content, producing content. But on the flip side of that, we need to be able to trust what AI is doing. So that means we don't just want to draft fastest, we don't just want to plow through steps. We want to make sure that everything is validated, everything is governed, and we're operationalizing our process in a way that is scalable and defendable. My last little piece here before I let everyone go, just kind of more from Visible Thread. If you are new to our webinars or any of our events, thank you for joining us, of course. And if not, you may be familiar with some of our content, but we do a lot of content online, a lot of thought leadership and educational content. We have our VT University modules, on-demand webinars, tons of great blogs and guides, a lot of great content on prompting and workflows and data readiness, AI adoption, and then there are some other ways that we can do this. So in our follow-up, I'll make sure that everybody has the links to this and links to some content that might be relevant or helpful for all of you. And then that is the end. I know that we are almost at time. I had one question that I was going to address really quickly with my last minute. So the question was, if you're starting from scratch, what is the best thing to address? So again, I think the best thing to do, if I'm starting from scratch and I'm incorporating AI into my process, really focus on what I want to solve. So what are the main things? Not, I see a demo of a product, it all looks wonderful, and we're just gonna throw the kitchen sink at it. That doesn't always work. It's gonna be tough for people to adopt, and it's a huge overhaul with a lot of areas where things could fall down. So really focus on what are the main problems that we want to solve, what types of platforms are going to kind of help us with those goals, and then really thinking about what your process looks like today. So it's kind of get your house in order before we go outside. So that's always my recommendation, is look at your processes, look at your data repositories, look at your functional approval and review cycles. What do those look like today? Where are their pitfalls? What can we fix? Because a repeatable, standardized process works much better and is much scalable within an AI environment. And yes, I had one question about copy of the slide deck. General tip, I have two questions here, and Matt, I will follow up with you after because we're a minute over, but tips about organizing and governing content. I have a whole presentation on that actually with metadata tagging, with structure, and I can share that with you as well. And yes, you will get a copy of the slide deck in the follow-up. So all of that will be available. Again, minute over, want to be respectful of everyone's time, but I will follow up with the folks in the Q&A that have questions and then share some additional content. Again, we're here every other Thursday and hope that you join us for our next session and have a great rest of your week. Thanks so much. Bye.